Hey there, and welcome back to Cognitive Curves, where we dig into the mysteries of the human mind, relationships, and the psychology behind why we do what we do. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for a lot of people: toxic relationships. This episode is a collaboration of experts to provide you with a deeper understanding, and the voice you're hearing represents a unified perspective from our team. Toxic relationships. It's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it really mean? Essentially, it's when the behaviors in a relationship start causing emotional and psychological damage. Sure, all relationships have rough patches, but toxic dynamics? They're more persistent, more intense. It's about manipulation, control, and ongoing emotional harm. And it's not just limited to romantic relationships. Toxicity can show up in friendships or even within families. Let's break down some key signs to look out for. One major red flag is manipulation and control. This is when one person starts trying to dominate or influence the other's thoughts or actions. Think of it as someone subtly, or not so subtly, limiting your autonomy. According to Lindahl and Malik's research back in 1999, this isn't just about physical control, it's psychological too. Then there's emotional abuse. This can take the form of gaslighting, where your reality is consistently questioned, or belittling and invalidating your feelings. It's the kind of behavior that leaves you doubting your own thoughts. Dr. Dutton and Goodman described how this form of neglect can be as damaging as direct abuse. Now, one of my favorite frameworks to look at when understanding toxic behaviors is what Dr. John Gottman calls the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse in relationships. And no, we're not talking about the end of the world, but if these 4 show up in your relationship, they can be just as destructive emotionally. Criticism. It's more than just feedback. It's when someone attacks your character instead of addressing a specific behavior. Contempt. That's the big one. It's the sarcasm, eye-rolling or sneering expressing pure disdain. Defensiveness, refusing to take responsibility or admit fault, often shifting the blame. Stonewalling, and then there's shutting down completely when someone emotionally withdraws and avoids interaction. The combination of these 4 creates an environment of constant emotional stress and dissatisfaction, and it often leads to the relationship breaking down. So, what drives people into these toxic patterns? One key idea in psychology is Dr. John Bowlby's attachment theory. He suggested that our early childhood experiences play a huge role in shaping how we connect with others as adults. People with an anxious attachment style might struggle with insecurity and clinginess, while those with an avoidant attachment style can be emotionally distant. But it's not just about attachment. Certain personality traits or disorders can also play a role. For instance, narcissistic tendencies often lead to entitlement and a lack of empathy. Campbell and Foster in their research pointed out how narcissists tend to exploit their partners. On the other hand, individuals with borderline traits may experience intense fears of abandonment, causing instability. And let's not forget past trauma. Studies by Dutton and Painter found that people who've witnessed or experienced trauma as children often internalize unhealthy patterns. It's like building a framework for relationships based on what you saw or experienced growing up. The effects of toxic relationships aren't just emotional, they're physical too. Emotionally, victims often find themselves grappling with low self-esteem. Research by McNulty and Widman highlights how constant criticism and neglect chip away at a person's self-worth. Toxic relationships are also strongly linked to anxiety and depression. Ongoing emotional turmoil can manifest as panic attacks or full-blown clinical depression, as noted by Harned and her team in 2000. And if these patterns continue, prolonged exposure can even lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, which comes with its own set of challenges: hypervigilance, flashbacks, you name it. Physically, the stress of a toxic relationship can raise cortisol levels, affecting everything from your heart to your immune system. Robles and Kiecolt-Glaser did some interesting research on how chronic emotional distress can lead to cardiovascular issues and even chronic pain. Now, let's talk solutions. Dr. Susan Forward, author of Toxic People, talks about early detection. She suggests taking a step back and asking yourself, are my needs being met here, or are they consistently ignored? It sounds simple, but self-awareness is key. Setting boundaries is another crucial step. Dr. Henry Cloud's work on boundaries is a great resource. He emphasizes the importance of saying no when needed and protecting your mental and emotional space. For those caught in deep toxic dynamics, seeking professional help can be transformative. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a tried and true method for identifying and challenging irrational patterns. And it's not just about getting unstuck, it's about rewriting those scripts that keep you trapped. Building resilience is also essential. Research by Fredrickson and Joyner talks about the broaden and build theory, which suggests that cultivating positive emotions and focusing on self-care can help you bounce back from the damage. Let me share a quick story. Sarah, a 30-year-old woman, was in a 5-year toxic relationship filled with manipulation and gaslighting. Her therapist used CBT techniques to help her recognize these patterns and regain her self-worth. In just 6 months, Sarah was able to leave that relationship and saw major improvements in her mental health. And this isn't just an isolated case. In a study by Lundgren and colleagues, 235 participants were tracked over 5 years. The results showed that people who stayed in toxic relationships faced increased rates of anxiety and depression. But those who recognized the toxicity early and left, they showed a marked recovery. Toxic relationships aren't just about a few arguments. They're characterized by persistent patterns of emotional abuse, manipulation, and neglect. The roots of these behaviors are complex, often tied to attachment styles, personality traits, or past trauma. But the good news is that by recognizing these patterns, setting clear boundaries, and seeking help, it's possible to regain control and rebuild healthier connections. Thanks for tuning in to Cognitive Curves. We hope this episode helped shed some light on toxic relationships and their impact. Remember, understanding is the first step toward change. If you found this episode helpful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need it. And as always, take care of yourself and your mind. Until next time.